and girls, Mrs. Branish here. I'm going to be reading to you chapter 13 of Stolen Girl today, titled Mansions. As you're reading, I want you to think about what the big mansion reminds Nadia of. And so you're not going to find out in this chapter, but as you're listening, I want you to think about and predict what you think the castle or mansion is actually going to be in her memory. Enjoy. I'll see you later. Chapter 13, Mansion. I got into the habit of going to Linda's house on Tuesdays after school, and she came to my house on Thursdays. It was hard to find a place to play inside. Linda shared a bedroom with Grace on the second floor. They had bunk beds and a bookshelf crammed with old novels. I longed to look through that bookshelf, but the bedroom itself made me feel like I couldn't breathe. I think part of it was because Grace was always there. She'd either be reading, propped up on a pillow on the top bunk, or she'd have a friend over and they'd be doing a project for school or something. There wasn't much of a place to play in Linda's backyard either. It was nothing more than an overgrown strip of land on a hill with wild bushes along either side and a laundry line down the middle. Linda had a deck of cards, and we tended to play Crazy Eights or Concentration at the kitchen table. But then one Tuesday, she brought out a board game called Monopoly. With the cards, we could play several games in the space of an hour or two, but Monopoly was a much longer game. Marissa would get dropped off at Linda's house on Tuesdays after finishing at the farm, but once we started playing Monopoly, the game would just be getting interesting when Marissa would arrive, and it was time for me to leave. "Can you come to my house on Saturday?" asked Linda. "Mom said you could stay even if the game takes all day." Marissa and Ivan agreed. Linda's mother suggested I come early on Saturday morning, and she invited me to stay for lunch. Ivan was doing some yard work at the Ukrainian church, so he walked me to Linda's house, and we decided that once I was finished, I would walk over to the church to meet him, and we'd head home together. When I got to Linda's, it was just before 9. Mrs. Henhock was in the kitchen making applesauce. "Linda will be down in a minute," she said. She offered me an apple, but I had just eaten breakfast. "Take a seat beside George." She pointed to the chair next to her husband. "He won't bite." I sat down, and Mr. Henhock lowered his newspaper, caught my eye, and gave me a wink. He seemed as friendly as Mrs. Henhock was. I must have let a fly into the house when I came in through the back door. It kept buzzing around my head. I waved it away, but it kept coming back. Suddenly, I felt the whack of a newspaper against the side of my head. I blinked once and then again. Why would Mr. Henhock hit me like that? I barely heard what he was saying to me now. And now here's a memory for Nadia. "Don't stuff yourself, Eva," Mutter is saying as she tries to pull the plate away, but Eva grabs it with 2 hands and pulls it back. "They're my favorite, Muddy, and you know it," says Eva, cutting off a giant portion of apple-filled sausage and shoving it into her mouth. A chunk of apple falls out and lands on the table. She picks it up and pops it back into her mouth. "If only that one would eat half as much as you," Mutter looks at me. "If the Fuhrer hears we've starved his little darling, it will be the end of us." I look at the plate in front of me and pick up my knife and fork. I cut one bite and hold a piece of sausage to my mouth, but the greasy smell of it makes me feel sick. I think of the women and children with the yellow stars. How can I eat this when it seems they have nothing? I push the plate away. Mutter slaps me hard across the face. And that was the end of Nadia's memory. "Nadia, are you all right?" Mr. Henhock's voice pulled me back to the present. I was standing by the table in the Henhock kitchen, a chair upended beside me. I lifted my hand to my cheek. I could almost feel the tingle of that long-ago slap from Mutter. "I'm fine," I told him. But I didn't feel fine. These scenes from the past made me feel queasy and confused. queasy, meaning you feel sick, like you have a tummy ache. Linda appeared in the kitchen doorway holding the Monopoly box. Nadia, you don't look so good. The kitchen was humid with an overwhelming smell of apples. I felt like I was going to be sick. Would you mind if we played outside instead? I asked. Sure, said Linda. We set the Monopoly box on the kitchen table. We'll be outside, okay? She said to her parents. Stay in the neighborhood, said Mr. Henhock. I gulped in fresh air as we stepped out to Linda's narrow, overgrown backyard. Let's go to the park, she said. I didn't know that there was a park. I walked beside Linda as she stayed on her own side of Usher Street and headed west. As we got farther from where she lived, I noticed that the houses seemed to get shabbier. Usher curved into Rushton Street, and I spotted a fancy wrought iron gate almost hidden by bushes. It looked like something from a storybook. Was I dreaming, or was this real? I went up to touch the gate. Come this way and I'll show you something better, said Linda, grabbing my hand. So it was real. We walked around the curve, through the bushes, I could see that the gate was attached to a long, fancy fence, also almost completely hidden by leaves. But all at once, there was a break in the bushes. I was so shocked by what I saw that I grabbed Linda's shoulder to steady myself. A run-down mansion on top of a hill. It seemed out of time and place, like something from a dream or a nightmare. It felt a little sinister, with paint peeling from the latticework and ragged curtains hanging limp inside shattered windows. That's Yates Castle, said Linda. I don't think anyone lives there anymore. Something about the vast abandoned mansion tugged at my memory, but why? It looked nothing like the large, well-kept farmhouse I had lived in with Eva and Mutter and Botter. And there was no building like this in the DP camp, of course. Hot bile rose up in my throat, and I doubled over, gagging, meaning she was throwing up. Nadia, are you all right? Asked Linda. I took a few heaving breaths and tried to calm myself. After a couple of minutes, I was able to stand up straight again. I'm fine, I managed. What's wrong? Does the house scare you? She asked. I couldn't answer. Does it remind you of something during the war? It must, I told her, but I don't know what. Come on, she said, grabbing my hand again. Let's get away from here. As we walked past the mansion or castle or haunted house, whatever it was, I couldn't tear my eyes from it. It was awful and beautiful at the same time. Here's one of Nadia's memories. I am being carried, kicking, screaming, up white painted steps. Baba! Baba! I want my Baba! I am put in a room all by myself. I try to open the door, but it's locked. I pound until my knuckles bleed, but no one answers. Linda was saying my name, but I ran down the block, pulling her with me. I had no idea where I was going, but I had to get away from that house. Slow down, she cried, tugging on my hand. I've got a stitch in my side. When I stopped running, I realized that I was huffing for breath and covered in sweat. I felt Linda's hand take mine, and she led me up a pathway through the trees. We stepped out onto tidy grass on a hill. It was open and airy and not scary at all. It was hard to believe that such a nice park was hidden from anyone strolling down Usher Street. She led me to the middle of the open space, and we both flopped onto the grass. For long minutes, we lay there side by side, watching the clouds and not saying a word. Then Linda asked, "What did Yates Castle remind you of?" A feeling of dread came over me. I sat up and looked at Linda. I had confided some things about my other past to her already. I longed to talk to her about those scenes that would flash into my mind. But would she understand? More important, would she tell anyone else? Mikhailo had warned me about talking to Canadians, but Linda was my best friend after all. I had to tell her something. All I remember is being locked up in a fancy house, I said. That and how frightened I was. Who would have locked you up? She asked. a puzzled expression on her face. I don't know. Was it your parents? No. It was hard to even think of Marussia or Ivan doing anything like that to me. I didn't say anything more, so Linda dropped the subject. We played a few games like I Spy and Finding Shapes in Clouds, and then she said we should go to the church to find Ivan. After the scare you've had, I'm sure you want to go home. I looked at Linda with new appreciation. What a kind friend she was. Do we have to go past that house again? I asked her. We don't have to, she said. She pointed up the hill. That's Terrace Hill Street. We can go up that way to your church. You sure you don't mind us not playing Monopoly? Nadia, said Linda, of course I don't mind. We can always play another day. Once we got up the incline to Terrace Hill Street, we had a beautiful view of the train station and beyond. You could see almost all the way to my house, yet the castle was hidden by trees. As we walked down Terrace Hill Street, I was surprised at how close the Ukrainian church was, and I was disturbed to realize that Yates Castle and the church were actually back to back. In fact, along the side of the church and extending down to the castle was a set of steps and a carriage road. My heart tightened. That little church had been one of the few places I had felt truly safe. But now that I realized how close it was to that creepy house, I wondered if the church would ever feel like a safe place again. Ivan was raking the leaves off the lawn in front of the church. I noticed that Mikhailo was helping his father plant a row of shrubs along the church walkway. When we got there, Ivan looked at me with surprise. You've finished your game already? We're not finished, but I looked to Linda. She caught my eye and nodded. We got bored, she said, shrugging. We'll play another day. Ivan looked at the pile of leaves he had raked up and then gazed at the rest of the lawn. I won't be finished here for at least another hour. I can help you, I said. So could I, said Linda. Do you have any more rakes? I looked at her and smiled in thanks. Ivan grinned. It won't take long at all with the three of us working. When we were finished with the yard work, Ivan took my hand and began to walk toward those dreaded steps that led down to Usher Street alongside Yates Castle. This is a quick way to Linda's, he said, and I want to show you an interesting house. Ivan knew about it. Of course he did. He had been doing yard work at the church. How could he miss seeing a castle behind the church? I was just surprised that I had never noticed it through the trees before. I didn't budge from my spot on the sidewalk. That place scares me. Ivan's forehead crinkled in surprise. He looked at me, then at Linda. She shrugged her shoulders. So you don't want to go down that way? He asked. No. We walked down Terrace Hill Street and then to Main and dropped Linda back home. Once it was just the two of us walking home, Ivan asked, Does that big old house remind you of something? I nodded. The German house in the country? I shook my head. Are you sure you don't want to go look at it with me? I'm sure. That's too bad, said Ivan, because it's an interesting place, and I thought you'd enjoy seeing it up close. I shivered at the thought of it. It was built in the 1800s by the man who owned the railroads, he said. He wanted it to look like... I squeezed Ivan's hand so hard that he looked at me and stopped talking mid-sentence. And that's the end of chapter 13.